That word has always been sort of strange to me because it seems like this labeling. And ever since I was little, I've always been labeled, you know, like they always try to put me in a box. And so any kind of words, for some reason, like if anyone says this, I'm like, no. It's like this immediate response. I am highly influenced by scientists, like Dan Ariely does a lot of behavioral economics sort of stuff, and whenever I feel like I can't make anything, I go home and listen to a science book. I've been listening to The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking, and I don't know, I find a lot of inspiration through people's sort of words. Visually, see, I'm so much more influenced by people's ideas than I am aesthetically. Yeah, and I really like things growing organically instead of me trying to think of an idea and like contrive it to be a specific way, because it never is. You know, you always come up with an idea and you try to execute it. It's always a little different. And so I like coming up with an idea, presenting it, and then developing and keep on developing. And that's what I like doing with my work, is my work really grows on itself, like very organically. I throw it out in the world and I change it, and I keep on changing and keep on changing as it is relevant to people's experience. I have this like uncomfortable relationship to the camera, but it's more of presenting the camera as fact, and then sort of having a more almost experiential understanding of something that's happening, and opposed to reading a book about why something's happening. Or I sort of see my work as being sort of educational, but sort of my way of trying to understand the world and understand where I am in the world, and what it's trying to really, like, you know, feel grounded almost. And it's really hard to do in this world, to like feel like you can understand where you are. This immediacy that happens with digital photography, like they were exploring it with video art, the immediacy, like Nam June Paik and Andy Warhol all did these things. Actually, Richard Serra and Joan Jonas as well did pieces where they were looking at the video camera and they'd be looking at themselves. And Joan Jonas is this piece where she did left side, right side, where she was trying to, you know, comprehend herself in space through the distortion of looking at herself immediately through a video camera. And it's gotten that way with digital photography. I'm really interested in what's happening as we look at these images and we're trying to comprehend them as real and comprehend them into our memories, and how a static image sort of overrides our remembrance of things, and how our memory actually works, and how all of this sort of gets tied into itself. When you're immediately presented with yourself, like without any delay, without 8 seconds, it takes about 8 seconds for it to go from your prefrontal cortex into other filtrations of processing where your memories go. So if you're immediately presented, it burns longer into your brain. Like all of a sudden you're like, it's like exposing your prefrontal cortex to that experience longer, is what I'm really interested in doing. Why I do a lot of stuff is I have really terrible memory. Like I have really bad immediate memory, which filters into my long-term memory. So I actually, through my work, I've never really talked about this ever, but it really comes from, I have a really hard time remembering things, and I have to actually I listen to recorded books, and I listen to them over and over and over again so that it just embeds itself into my memory. And so I've read a lot of the philosophers, and I write down in these like journals everything about them. And then years later I'll come back because I'll think of something and I'll go to write down, and I'm like, oh my God, I thought of that idea like 7 years ago. Like, and it's, yeah, it feels so weird almost having this removal of my own self, because like I'll do in-depth investigative research on specific people, and then it just fades away because the brain is made to forget. Because if we held all that information in our brain, we wouldn't be able to process the experience of now. There's different types. There's like 3 or 4 different types of memory, like data memory, but they have specific words, and I know what they are, but I can't remember. That is terrible. I feel like it's completely distorted our perception of time, but I've lived in a time when photography's always been present. So what we can do with photography now, and it's kind of weird, we can change our history in such a way that wasn't before really possible. And it's like we have this like time machine almost. I think we hit this point, I don't know exactly when it was, but it was like almost like everything's on the table. We can now go back and explore things, but yet we're still progressing because we have so much we could go back and explore. And it's not about looking back at the past, but it's about like, instead of always moving, maybe it's time to stop and evaluate. And I think that would be really good for humanity. I think it would be really good for us to like be evaluating instead of always trying to move forward. Because the human isn't a machine or a computer, and like there is a lot of analysis to comparing a memory to like a hard drive, or it's not like that. You don't store memories that way, but because humans like to find like something to compare something to, we're comparing it to that. But we lose our memories. Every time you remember a memory, you're remembering the memory in present day, and then it filters on top of itself. And so the more you remember something, the more and more distorted it becomes. It's just really fascinating. We can't miss anyone. We can't have those negative feelings. I feel like all of this is like a response to feeling alone. You know, when you're in the subway, you have your headphones on, or you're looking at your phone, even though your phone doesn't work, and you're trying to connect. We're trying to connect through this by disconnecting ourselves from the actual experience, because being with people is hard. We have emotions, we have feelings, we have all this stuff, and it's so hard just to like try and connect with the person when they're really there. And so we like remove ourselves, and then we have this artificial connection where it's not as hard, it's not as scary, and we don't have to be rejected, and we don't have to have all these things. And through technology, it's allowing us to do this. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but I do have feelings towards it. I do have a lot of feelings towards the computer, and because we're trying to advance and advance and advance, you know, things get so complicated, and things are always so complicated, and I try to like take the complication and reduce, but it's not reductionism, because I don't think that we can get at any through the process of reductionism. It just becomes something different. And so I'm trying to just, like the video artists were doing in the 60s and 70s, just sort of point out the actual material, the actual camera, the actual components in the computer, and talk about it just straight on almost. Most of my work is about distortion of the space, where you, through looking at an image, immediately you're placed into a different location. And here I'm like now working with the actual location and having sort of this removed context with the still image and life, and like how people are actually in the gallery and then being documented in this gallery space. And I mean, the gallery is a really like strange, you know, phenomenon. It's like this white empty space. I mean, I had some really like immediate responses to being like people being watched in a gallery space, because it's almost like, I don't know, it's like something sacred. It's not, it's like you're going there for sort of almost an intimate experience with something. I have a really hard time documenting my stuff, and so I'll like start explaining something, and they're like, oh, do you have pictures? And I'll be like, no, just listen. And now there's like this need of proof. So through my work, not on purpose, But now almost all my work documents itself. Like the documentation of the work is the work itself, you know? And even though it's nothing like, I mean, going back to like the happenings where like that experience was what the art piece was, but they still documented it. And so that's how we remember it, is through this documentation, even though that's not really what happened. And so that's sort of what my work tries to hit upon, is through photography, through video, through all these things, through documentation. It's really not what happened, and every moment that we were in or have been in is gone. And you don't really get that sense of loss in my stuff, because I really am not like Christian Boltanski. I love his stuff, and I go and I see his stuff and I just feel so sad, because it's like the loss of humans, and it's like that person was a person, that person was a person, and now they're gone. And I don't like evoking such sadness. Like, I just like people thinking. I like to evoke thought in my work, and I think that will add a nice thing, like thought perpetuating experience. Hopefully, I hope. I hope to evoke thought. That's all I ever hope to do, is just make people think. It doesn't matter what they're thinking about, just think.